Hi, Heart Center Tech members and leaders. My name is Nitin, and I serve as Director of Blockchain Labs and Director of Digital Asset Labs at IBM. And I'm really happy to be here, on a video chat. I really wanted to be there, but I was called last minute to have some client meetings, and I had some urgent fires to put out. So I'm flying out tomorrow to Asia, and so I regret that I'll not be there in person, but I look forward to our next meeting soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Jude, I'll give it back to you for questions.
Thank you for being here, and thanks for filling us in on the latest in business blockchain. And that's what everyone here is about to learn about. Not the sketchy crypto world, even though it's a part of it, but this is the business blockchain stuff. So, what are the basics of the blockchain that, you have, that you captured in your book, and just the general, what is business blockchain?
So what is business blockchain? The question that you asked, I think I recently published a book on this called Blockchain for Business, and that's aptly titled. We touched upon numerous elements of blockchain, not just the technology sets, but the various industries that it aims to revolutionize and disrupt in a meaningful way. So there's a lot of hype, as you mentioned, Jude, in terms of focus on cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency-based revolutions. But many of us who have been in the field have adopted the technology to derive meaningful use cases around it. So let me first explain what are we trying to do with blockchain, and then I'll go a bit more into sort of details if I can. So essentially, fundamentally, we are trying to solve the issue of time and trust. And these two constructs have enormous implications on many industries. Time leads to a lot of intermediation, because a lot of intermediaries who come and solve the issue of compressing time by providing a value-add service. And same thing with trust. You have a lot of entities and elements and who provide a trust level service, including financial services, banks, but also the cost of fraud, lack of trust, leads to a lot of business challenges. So time and trust are two fundamental issues. And if you were to extrapolate these two constructs and apply the technical elements, so blockchain is a set of protocols that is aiming to induce trust in most business networks. So imagine a sort of a business network that's fragmented, and each of them have their own business processes. And if we were to apply blockchain meaningfully in distilling those business processes and flattening them out, then we are essentially doing two things. We are speeding up the rate at which we do commerce and business. At the same time, we are introducing trust in the system, which leads to enormous cost savings, at the same time, enormous business opportunity. And that's why we equate this revolution to what internet has done in the past with information. We expect something similar, the similar magnitude, to happen with things of value. I'll explain that in a few minutes.
So businesses now have an extra edge that they can utilize with this, and you touched briefly on the benefits. Basically is the time and the trust, and that's one of the benefits for early adoption. It's also, I would assume, gives a competitive edge if you're able to at least begin to look at this for your business, or begin to explore what your use case is on that. Is in addition to those benefits and it helping with competition, does it increase, revenue increases through efficiencies with this? Are you seeing things like that happen?
No, that's a brilliant question, Jude. So how do businesses stay competitive and use blockchain for the business purposes? I've addressed a whole chapter on this on the book, and I'm sorry I was not there. Otherwise, I would have given you more details. But essentially, what we are seeing today is use of technology for cost efficiency purposes, which is essentially the business case that the industry has to make is, why are we expending people time, talent, energy, and cost? And essentially, the use case that we make is cost efficiency and creation of new business model. That's the initial impetus of all the investment and all the talent that's going into revolutionizing industries. However, the reason why I'm doing this is essentially going after the new business model, the new co-creation elements that I see that the industry can really benefit from. right? And it's similar to, if you recall the early days, and I was in college at the time, and so I'm dating myself here, is when we were talking about fast file transfer in the internet days, you would see, expression on people's faces, how is this going to change my business, change my life? Lo and behold, 12 years later, there were no travel agents, there were no green screen scrapers, there were essentially the information brokers that was sitting between consumers and the service providers essentially went away. But of course, there were new intermediaries that were born. So I expect blockchain to sort of revolutionize the notion of marketplaces, to connect a truly global, equitable system of value, which is ability for me to move value globally with trust, with singularity, and with sort of embedded element of asset integrity across the world with least friction and less cost. And if you take some of these principles and apply them to different spaces, for example, private equity, securitization of mortgages, ability for me to raise funds, I think all these leads to a massive global marketplace, which today is either contained to a silo, either by jurisdictions, or eventually because of the access to some of these markets. I think that's the eventual element. So in short, I think the objective should be today is cost efficiencies, but the long-term objective is to completely revolutionize and change many industries who are dealing with things of value, essentially.
Nice. What do you say to C-level executives that are running profitable companies right now, doing well, not particularly enthusiastic about being innovative to change the way things are, and to look at somewhat compartmentalizing where blockchain could work and could not work? I kind of say start with a use case study to see where it can go. It's somewhat like form follows function in architecture. So if you're going to like build your headquarters and you do a flow chart, it could kind of be similar to that. What do you say? What is the first basic steps? Of course, use case study, but how does that break down? What do you look at first, and how do you understand how to begin to look at using a blockchain app? IBM has, I think, 4 different versions that you can work with. So how do you end up using either a template of a blockchain as an application from IBM, or something what do you tell these C-level executives that are just a little resistant to having to reinvent the wheel, it feels like?
No, I think that's something I grapple with on a daily basis. So for the C-level executives, as you call, who are in profitable businesses, whose businesses are running at the zenith and has a lot of progressive power, I think they have luxury of time, and they have luxury of small investments they can make in primarily understanding the impact and the potential of technology. And let me explain what that means, right? Essentially, just like, and I think we look into true disruptive powers of blockchain. And in many cases, if you have C-level executives who are either running financial services or in marketplace business, or in a business that's in the business of creating platforms, essentially connecting two parties to conduct business, I think you got to think hard in terms of what are the disruptive elements. And I think one way to do that is to take a point of view of what if I were to cannibalize my own business, what that model will look like. So to that, what we have done in the past 4.5 years that I've dedicated my life to working with businesses and having this hard conversation with very senior level executives. And I think vision really matters, which means vision not for the sake of vision, but envisioning the disruptive power of ability for me to take the tenets of blockchain, which essentially is trade, trust, ownership. These 3 essentially leads to ability for me to make sure that the value transfer happens seamlessly, is essentially few things, which is identifying a use case that has enough legs to it, which means there's enough sort of seepage in value. There's enough inefficiencies, whether it's cost inefficiencies or resource inefficiencies, and solving those problems for yourself. But you also have to realize that if you're solving the problem for yourself, then you should also make sure the problem is also industry's problem, because blockchain is never a single industry or single enterprise agenda. It's always the industry-specific agenda. You're always creating an industry-specific network, industry-specific consortium. So if you can solve the problem for yourself then if it's also an industry problem, then can you not have the network effect of this problem? And some use cases, and I'll list some use cases for our reference, securities lending space. So if you look at many of the custodies bank who are in working with broker-dealer networks and working with enterprises in providing the security lending business, you realize that the amount of cost that goes into not just keeping information in sync with various asset management, wealth management, treasury management systems, but it's also a global issue where one custody bank or one entity is dealing with another custody bank, and the time and resource it takes to make sure the books are in sync. So I think those are initial points that you can justify the initial investments. But at the same time, you can morph the model just like what UPS have done from the purely being a logistics company to now providing back office and business process management functions. You can envision those new functions and your new role in this disruptive world that we envision it. So I think those would be my message to C-level executives, to do it while you have the time and when it's convenient, as opposed to being in reactionary mode, which is what we've seen in the late .com era, when a lot of business was simply gone. I think you look at Blockbusters of the world, they simply don't exist. And it literally took them 3 years to disappear when from the top of their game to not be in existence at all. So I would communicate that, with a lot of sort of conviction, to say, do it while you have the luxury of time and understand the technology and potential, because that is fundamental to disruption.
Excellent. That was a great answer. Really good. Thank you. Well, I think one more, I guess, question would be, with any interest of this for the next step for us here in Santa Monica, is we want to offer like a 4 to 6 hour workshop to kind of work on use case studies, so we can like prepare people for the garage for IBM. So, we have the questions that, I know the questions that are there, but also, is there any other, insights that, for working out a use case study that you have found to kind of be aware of? Like, what are the things on people's minds they should, when they leave this talk today with this panel, and when they're done listening to you today, what should be the top 3 things on their mind that they should begin to think about before they even begin their use case study? Like, what about their company should they be reflecting on to kind of prepare themselves to get ready to do a use case study?
That is something which I think, we've spent a lot of time in the industry in terms of POCs, and 99% of POCs have failed. And that's a good thing, because we know what works and what doesn't work now. So 3 things I would think that the audience should take away from this workshop and, from this session and perhaps the next workshop is, stick to fundamentals, right? So if you look at what are we solving for, I would say time and trust, not time or trust. And I stick to that because that helps me stay focused on the agenda. Am I solving for time and trust, and what is the cost associated with both? For example, if I'm transferring money cross-border, how much time does it take, and what's the cost of unlocked capital? And amalgamating those two will give me a price point which I have something to work towards. Second thing is sticking to fundamentals. I oftentimes talk about this in quite detail, where we talk about trade, trust, ownership, transactionality, which means these, at least 3 of the 4 elements that I talked about, should be a hallmark of a use case. There should be something that defines ownership. There should be something of value, and there should be some element that facilitates movement of an asset, of things of value, and hence the word trade. Because blockchain is all about moving value, just like internet was about moving information. And the third thing that I oftentimes focus on, and I would encourage many of the audiences to take this with them, is think assets. Think assets, think value, think the consequential nature of mistakes as you move the assets. Which means we aren't solving for data. And 90% of the use cases that we've seen was focused on data dissemination as opposed to asset movement. Of course, blockchain as technology set facilitates many parties to come together on network, leads to immutability of data, which leads to prevention of fraud because you can't collude. All those are technical tenets, but what we need to focus on is we're not solving for data. We have enough technology that allows for dissemination of data We are moving true notion of asset, whether it's a container, whether it's your mortgage, whether it's mortgage-backed securities, commodities, any unit of an asset that needs to be moved and change ownership, and dealing with all the back office functions that we do to facilitate that. I think that's the core of the use cases that you should consider. And of course, you do have to have economic value, which means somebody, before they spend money in investing in these use cases and technology projects, you have to define as to where is the value they're going to get out of it once either it's proven or it goes into production. So those are the few things I would say that should be take away, not only from this session for the audience, but as they come prepared for the workshop. I think that would be a focused, a more valued agenda that we should bring to the table, I think.
Excellent. Very good points and lots of good information in there. And, the heart-centered tech members and their leaders, there's some of a philosophy where time divided by trust equals success in your assets. Because if you don't even trust somebody, you spend more time backing your stuff up, right? So the heart-centered tech movement is really a verification system where everyone already trusts each other, and it's a slow process. We have like 26 leaders now, but the second leader totally trusts the 15th leader, and they don't even know each other. So it's been a great program. I'm glad we're going to be able to offer this to them coming up in the future. And thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Is there anything last words, final words?
No, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great session today, and hopefully you go home energized, and don't limit yourself by imagination. Think of what could be done with this. With that, I again sincerely regret not being there, but hopefully I've offered you the chance to hold me back, and I'm happy to come back again and have a much more deeper conversation. So thank you so much, and enjoy the event.